Do you know who I am? The shout cut through the afternoon crowd like a siren. Conversation stopped. Heads turned. Even the traffic noise along Madison Avenue seemed quieter for a moment. A paper coffee cup rolled across the sidewalk. Dark liquid dripped between the cracks in the concrete. At the center of it all stood a black woman holding a leather tote bag. And a very angry man. The man looked to be in his late 50s. Tall, broad-shouldered, expensive watch, expensive suit. The kind of confidence that came from spending years being obeyed. His name was Robert Harlan, police chief of the city. Off duty, but judging by the way he was acting, nobody would have guessed it. You bumped into me. His voice echoed outside the restaurant entrance. The woman glanced at the coffee stain spreading across his jacket, then at the overturned cup near her feet. A few pedestrians stopped to watch. Others quietly reached for their phones. The woman took a slow breath. I'm sorry about the coffee. Her voice was calm, steady. No attitude. No excuses. Just an apology. That should have ended it. Most people would have accepted it. Most people would have moved on. Robert Harlan didn't. He stepped forward, the muscles in his jaw tightening. You think sorry fixes this? The woman remained still. The spring breeze moved a few loose strands of hair across her face. She gently brushed them aside. Again, no anger, no fear, no reaction. Somewhere behind the growing crowd, a car horn sounded. Nobody paid attention. The scene unfolding on the sidewalk had become far more interesting. An older man standing near a newspaper stand frowned. A young couple exchanged uncomfortable looks. Something about the situation felt wrong. Not because coffee had spilled, because of the imbalance. One person was escalating. The other wasn't. The woman looked to be in her mid-30s. Professionally dressed. Dark navy blazer. Simple earrings. Nothing flashy. Nothing that attracted attention. The kind of person most people would walk past without remembering. Robert pointed toward the stain on his jacket. Do you know how much this suit costs? The woman lowered her eyes briefly, then looked back up. No. The answer was honest, and somehow that seemed to irritate him even more. Several people nearby started recording openly now. Phones lifted. Cameras pointed. The crowd continued growing. A restaurant hostess appeared in the doorway. Two valet attendants stopped working. Even they sensed something unusual. The woman adjusted the strap of her bag. I said I'm sorry. Still calm. Still respectful. Still refusing to argue. Robert laughed. A sharp laugh. The kind people use when they want an audience. Oh, that's it. Nobody spoke. The tension was beginning to spread, like a storm cloud moving across sunlight. The woman glanced around briefly. Not nervously. Observantly. Taking in the people. The exits. The traffic. The cameras mounted above nearby storefronts. Then her eyes returned to Robert. The movement was subtle. So subtle almost nobody noticed. Almost. A gray-haired man standing near the curb did. His expression changed slightly. Only slightly. As if he had recognized something. Not her face. Something else. Something harder to explain. Meanwhile, Robert continued. His voice louder now. Designed to be heard. Designed to embarrass. You people always think an apology fixes everything. Several heads turned. The comment landed badly. Very badly. A woman in the crowd frowned. Another crossed her arms. The atmosphere shifted. Just a little. But enough. The black woman said nothing. Not because she lacked a response. Because she didn't need one. That somehow made Robert even angrier. The police chief took another step forward. Too close now. Close enough that several people exchanged concerned looks. Close enough that the situation no longer felt like an argument. It felt like intimidation. The woman's expression never changed. Her pulse remained steady. Her breathing remained controlled. The same calmness. The same patience. The same quiet confidence. A confidence that didn't fit the situation. Not at all. Robert pointed a finger toward her. You should be grateful I'm being polite. The crowd fell silent. Completely silent. Because everyone understood the irony. The man clearly wasn't being polite. Not even close. The woman looked at the finger. Then at Robert. Then she said something so quietly that several people almost missed it. Are you always like this? The question landed harder than an insult. A few people actually laughed. Not loudly. Just enough. Robert's face darkened instantly. Embarrassment. Anger. Ego. All colliding at once. The police chief straightened his shoulders. The crowd waited. Phones remained raised. Nobody wanted to leave now. Because everyone could feel it. The situation wasn't ending. It was only beginning. And standing in the middle of it all The black woman remained remarkably calm, almost as if she'd dealt with men like Robert Harlan before, almost as if she already knew exactly how this story would end. Robert didn't notice. Not yet, because at that moment, he still believed he was the most powerful person on that sidewalk. And that was about to become a very expensive mistake. For several seconds after Maya asked the question, nobody spoke. "Are you always like this?" The words hung in the air. Simple, quiet, yet somehow heavier than everything Robert Harlan had shouted so far. The police chief stared at her. The crowd stared at him. And for the first time since the confrontation began, Robert looked unsure. Only for a moment. Then his pride recovered. The problem wasn't the question. The problem was the laughter. A few people had laughed. Not many, but enough. Enough for him to notice. Enough for him to feel it. Embarrassment had a way of finding people who weren't used to being challenged, especially men who spent years surrounded by people saying yes. Robert straightened his jacket, or at least tried to. The coffee stain remained. Dark. Visible. Annoying. The reminder seemed to make him even angrier. "You think this is funny?" Nobody answered. Not Maya. Not the crowd. Not even the people recording. The silence irritated him more than any insult could have, because silence left room for judgment. And judging by the faces around him, people were already making up their minds. Maya adjusted the strap on her bag again. The same movement. The same calm pace. The same complete lack of urgency. It was almost unsettling. Most people became defensive when confronted. Others became emotional. Some became afraid. Maya became none of those things. She simply stood there, patient, observant, as though she had all the time in the world. A young man near the front of the crowd whispered to his girlfriend, "She's handling this better than I would." The girlfriend nodded. "Way better." Robert heard them. His jaw tightened. He turned back toward Maya. "You still haven't answered my question." Maya looked at him. "What question?" The response caught him off guard. "You know exactly what question." She thought for a moment, then nodded. "The suit." Several people smiled. A few even looked away to hide it. The reaction only made things worse. Robert felt control slipping, not over the situation, over the audience. And that's what bothered him. People like Robert understood attention. They understood authority. They understood perception. For years, he'd been the most important person in nearly every room he entered. Now strangers were looking at him differently. Not with admiration. Not with respect. Something else. Something he didn't like. The police chief took another step forward. The crowd instinctively leaned in. Phones remained raised. One woman was now live streaming. Several people watched through screens instead of with their own eyes. The confrontation was spreading beyond the sidewalk. Nobody knew that yet. Maya did. Not because she checked. Because she assumed. That's what happened in modern cities. Every public moment belonged to the internet within minutes. Still, she showed no concern. No panic. No attempt to explain herself. Nothing. Robert pointed toward her tote bag. "What's in there?" The question seemed random. Several people frowned. Maya glanced down briefly. "My belongings." More silence. More irritation. The answer was technically correct, and completely unhelpful. The police chief folded his arms. "You're very confident." "No," Maya replied. "I'm just standing here." That answer landed harder than the first one, because it was true. Painfully true. The only person escalating was Robert. The only person creating a scene was Robert. The realization was becoming impossible to ignore. An older woman standing near the restaurant. Entrance finally spoke. "Sir," she already apologized. Several heads nodded. The support surprised Maya. It clearly surprised Robert too. The police chief turned toward the woman. His expression hardened. Immediately, the woman took a step back. Not because she was afraid. Because she recognized authority when she saw it. Robert noticed. The reaction pleased him. At least a little. Then he turned back toward Maya, expecting the same result. He didn't get it. The black woman remained exactly where she was. Calm. Still. Watching. The gray-haired man near the newspaper stand continued observing her. His eyes narrowed slightly. Something felt familiar. Not her appearance. Not her voice. The way she watched people. The way she scanned the environment. The way she never turned her back completely to the crowd. Small details. Tiny details. Most people would never notice. He did. Years ago, he'd seen similar behavior. Not often, but enough. The memory tugged at him, just beyond reach. Meanwhile, Robert kept talking. Talking had become easier than stopping. "You know what your problem is?" Maya didn't answer. You think you're smarter than everybody else. A few people exchanged confused looks. Nothing about her behavior suggested that. If anything, she'd said less than anyone there. The contradiction hung awkwardly in the air. Maya finally spoke. Sir. Robert immediately interrupted. No, don't sir me. The irony nearly made a teenager laugh out loud. He managed to stop himself. Barely. Maya paused, then nodded. Okay. Again. No argument. No resistance. No emotional reaction. The police chief was beginning to discover something dangerous. Anger needs fuel, and Maya refused to provide any. The confrontation had become one-sided. Everyone could see it. Everyone except Robert. A police cruiser slowly passed the intersection nearby. Its lights were off. Its officers unaware of the scene unfolding less than 50 yards away. Robert noticed the vehicle, and something changed. The sight reminded him who he was. Or more accurately, who he believed he was. His shoulders squared. His voice grew louder. More confident. More aggressive. The crowd felt it immediately. The temperature of the conversation shifted. This wasn't about coffee anymore. It hadn't been for a while. This was about pride. And pride is dangerous when combined with authority. Robert looked directly into Maya's eyes, then asked the question he thought would end everything. The question he expected would finally make her nervous. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? The crowd fell silent again. Completely silent. Because everyone already knew the answer. The real question wasn't whether Maya knew who Robert Harlan was. The real question was why she didn't seem to care. And standing there beneath the afternoon sunlight, with dozens of cameras pointed toward her, Maya Brooks simply looked at him. Calm, patient, almost sympathetic, as though she could already see where this road ended. And Robert couldn't. For a few seconds after Robert asked the question, nobody moved. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? The afternoon sun reflected off nearby windows. Traffic continued moving through the intersection. A bus stopped at the curb. People got off. People got on. Yet dozens of eyes remained fixed on the same sidewalk. The same confrontation. The same two people. Maya Brooks looked at Robert Harlan. Then she answered, yes. The response surprised him. His eyebrows lifted slightly. You do? Maya nodded. You're upset about your suit. A few people laughed again. Louder this time. Not because she was trying to be funny. Because she wasn't. The answer was simply honest. And honesty had become surprisingly uncomfortable. Especially for Robert. The police chief felt heat rising into his face. The crowd wasn't behaving the way he expected. Neither was Maya. Nothing about this encounter was going according to plan. The problem was simple. Robert wanted a reaction. Fear. Embarrassment. Submission. Anything. Instead, he kept running into the same wall. Calm. Endless calm. The kind that made angry people feel even angrier. Robert glanced around, noticing the cameras, the phones, the faces. Suddenly, an idea formed. A familiar idea. An old idea. The kind people with authority often rely on when respect begins slipping away. Status. If he couldn't win the argument, he could remind everyone who he was. The police chief straightened his shoulders. My name is Robert Harlan. Nobody responded. He continued anyway. Police Chief Robert Harlan. Several people exchanged glances. A few recognized the name immediately. Others didn't. The title carried more weight than the man. That was often true with authority. The young couple near the front looked at one another. Wait. The boyfriend frowned. He's the police chief? The girlfriend nodded slowly. I think so. The information spread through the crowd. Quietly. Like a ripple moving across water. Police chief. Police chief. Police chief. People whispered the words. Robert heard them. The reaction pleased him. At least a little. Finally. Something. Some acknowledgement. Some recognition. The police chief folded his arms and looked directly at Maya. Expecting change. Expecting concern. Expecting something. Anything. Nothing happened. Maya simply stood there. Exactly the same. Exactly as calm. Exactly as composed. The realization hit Robert harder than he wanted to admit. She either wasn't impressed, or she genuinely didn't care. Neither possibility felt acceptable. The police chief laughed. A short laugh. Forced. You know, most people would be apologizing a lot harder right now. Maya tilted her head slightly. The movement was subtle. Curious. Almost thoughtful. I already apologized. Again. Simple. Direct. Impossible to argue with. Several bystanders nodded. One woman quietly muttered, She's right. Robert heard that too. The support annoyed him, more than it should have, because this was no longer about coffee, no longer about an accident, no longer about a stained jacket. This had become something else entirely. A battle for control. And control was something Robert rarely lost. A restaurant manager finally stepped outside. Concerned, careful, trying to understand what was happening. The moment he recognized Robert, his posture changed immediately. Chief Harlan. Robert nodded. The manager turned toward Maya, his expression becoming cautious. Different, less friendly. The shift didn't go unnoticed. Several people frowned. Maya noticed too. She simply didn't react. The manager cleared his throat. Ma'am, maybe we can all calm down. The crowd immediately sensed the problem. Nobody had seen Maya lose her temper. Nobody had seen Maya raise her voice. Yet somehow she was being treated like part of the disturbance. The imbalance felt obvious. The gray-haired man near the newspaper stand continued watching. His curiosity had grown. The longer this continued, the stranger it became. The woman wasn't acting like an ordinary pedestrian. She wasn't acting intimidated. She wasn't acting impressed. She wasn't even acting annoyed. The old man had spent 26 years in the military. He knew composure when he saw it. And Maya's composure felt familiar. Dangerously familiar. Meanwhile, Robert kept talking. Because talking still felt like winning. People need to learn accountability. Several people stared at him. The statement sounded absurd, especially given the situation. A teenager filming the encounter quietly whispered, "Is he hearing himself?" His friend shook his head. Nope. The videos were spreading now. Social media, live streams, group chats, neighborhood pages. The confrontation had escaped the sidewalk. Thousands of people were beginning to see it. Nobody present knew that yet. Maya probably suspected. The police chief certainly didn't. Robert pointed toward her bag again. The same bag. The same target. The same obsession. What do you even do? The question felt strangely personal. Several people exchanged looks. Maya seemed unbothered. I work. The answer triggered another wave of laughter. Not mocking laughter. Disbelief. Because every answer she gave somehow exposed the weakness in every question he asked. Robert's frustration continued building. Layer after layer. Like pressure inside a sealed container. The crowd could feel it. The manager could feel it. Even the valet attendants could feel it. The situation was approaching a line. A dangerous line. And Robert was moving toward it fast. Then something happened. A uniformed patrol officer stepped out of a nearby convenience store. Coffee in one hand. Receipt in the other. He immediately noticed the crowd. Immediately noticed Robert. And immediately changed direction. The officer walked toward the sidewalk. Toward the confrontation. Toward the growing audience. Robert saw him coming. And for the first time since this started, he smiled. A real smile. Confident. Certain. The kind of smile that appears when someone believes help has arrived. The crowd noticed too. Several people lowered their phones slightly. Curious. Wondering what happened next. Maya simply watched. Calm as ever. The patrol officer approached. Stopped beside Robert. And asked the question everyone had been waiting for. Chief. The word hung in the air. Robert's smile widened. Because finally, he thought the situation was about to turn in his favor. For a moment, nobody spoke. The patrol officer stood beside Robert Harlan. Coffee in one hand. Confusion on his face. The crowd waited. Phones remained raised. Everyone expected the situation to change. And it did. Just not the way Robert imagined. The police chief smiled confidently. Officer. The younger patrolman nodded. Chief. Robert gestured toward Maya. The movement was casual. Dismissive. The kind of gesture people make when they believe the outcome is already decided. This woman caused a disturbance. Several heads immediately turned. A few people frowned. One woman actually laughed. Not because anything was funny. Because the statement was ridiculous. The officer looked confused. His eyes shifted toward Maya. Then toward the crowd. Then back toward Robert. What kind of disturbance? Nobody answered immediately. The silence itself became an answer. The officer noticed. So did several people recording. Robert's confidence slipped slightly. Only slightly. This whole situation. The patrolman looked around again. A teenager near the front couldn't help himself. She hasn't done anything. Several people nodded. The officer's confusion deepened. Meanwhile, Maya remained exactly where she was. Quiet. Patient. Watching. The same calm expression. The same steady breathing. The same complete lack of concern. It was beginning to unsettle everyone, including the officer. Because people under pressure usually look pressured, Maya didn't. Not even a little. The patrolman cleared his throat. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Maya looked at him. Yes. Nothing more. No complaint. No accusation. No attempt to recruit sympathy. Just a simple answer. The officer nodded slowly. Then something interesting happened. He relaxed. Subtly. Almost unconsciously. As though speaking with Maya somehow lowered the temperature of the entire encounter. Robert noticed. And he didn't like it. Not one bit. Because attention kept drifting away from him. Authority kept slipping away from him. The audience kept choosing someone else. The police chief folded his arms tighter, trying to reclaim control, trying to reassert status, trying to remind everyone who mattered here. Unfortunately, every minute seemed to accomplish the opposite. Across the street, the gray-haired veteran continued observing Maya. His curiosity had become genuine concern. 26 years in the military had taught him something important. People revealed themselves under pressure. Some became aggressive. Some became emotional. Some became reckless. Maya had become none of those things. She had remained calm from the very beginning. Not fake calm. Not forced calm. Real calm. The kind that came from experience. The kind people earned. The old veteran had seen it before. In combat zones. In crisis situations. In people trained to function while everyone else panicked. The memory remained frustratingly incomplete, like a puzzle missing one piece. Meanwhile, Robert continued making assumptions. The first assumption, Maya was intimidated. Wrong. The second assumption, Maya needed help. Wrong. The third assumption, Maya cared about his title. Very wrong. The problem was that Robert never questioned those assumptions. Power rarely teaches self-awareness. Quite the opposite. For years, people had adjusted themselves around him. Stepped aside. Agreed quickly. Apologized quickly. Obeyed quickly. Now he stood face to face with someone who wasn't doing any of those things. And he didn't know how to process it. The patrol officer shifted uncomfortably. "Chief, maybe this was just an accident." Several people nodded. Again, the support landed on Maya's side. Again, Robert's jaw tightened. It wasn't just an accident. The officer hesitated. Then what was it? That question hung in the air. Because nobody knew the answer. Not even Robert. Deep down, he understood that. This had stopped being about coffee long ago. The crowd knew it. The officer knew it. The restaurant manager knew it. Only Robert kept pretending otherwise. Maya glanced briefly toward the intersection. A black SUV turned the corner, then disappeared into traffic. The observation lasted less than a second. Yet she cataloged it automatically. Just like the cameras. Just like the exits. Just like the faces in the crowd. A habit. An old habit. One she rarely thought about anymore. The veteran noticed again. And this time something clicked. Not fully, but enough. The realization made his eyes narrow. Interesting. Very interesting. The older man stepped a little closer. Not enough to join the conversation. Just enough to listen. Meanwhile, Robert looked directly at Maya. "What exactly do you do?" The question returned. Again. For some reason, he couldn't let it go. Maybe because he wanted a category. People feel safer when they can categorize someone. Teacher, lawyer, waitress, salesperson, anything. A label creates certainty. Maya offered none. She simply looked at him, then smiled politely. A small smile, barely visible. "I work for the government." The answer changed everything. And nothing. Several people exchanged looks. The patrol officer blinked. The veteran's eyebrows rose slightly. Robert laughed. A dismissive laugh. Everybody works for the government these days. Maya nodded. Some do. Again. No argument. No explanation. No details. The answer frustrated him immediately. The police chief felt like he was chasing smoke. Every question produced less information. Not more. The crowd could sense it. And the less Maya revealed, the more curious everyone became. Including Robert. Especially Robert. The afternoon sun had begun sinking lower now. Long shadows stretched across the sidewalk. Traffic thickened. The crowd remained. Nobody wanted to leave. Because everyone could feel something. A shift. A turn. The sense that the story wasn't unfolding the way it usually did. The powerful man wasn't gaining control. He was losing it. One tiny piece at a time. The patrol officer finally looked at Robert. Then at Maya. Then back at Robert. And for the first time since arriving, he seemed unsure whose side he should be on. That realization landed harder than any argument. Because authority works best when everyone accepts it. And acceptance was beginning to disappear. Robert felt it. The crowd felt it. Even Maya felt it. The difference was simple. Only one of them seemed completely comfortable with where things were heading. As the veteran continued watching from across the sidewalk, a single thought entered his mind. Who exactly is this woman? And why does she look like the only person here who already knows what's coming next? The crowd should have dispersed by now. Most public arguments lasted a few minutes. 10 at most. People got bored. People moved on. Life continued. This one didn't. Nearly 20 minutes had passed. Yet nobody wanted to leave. Because something felt unfinished. Something felt wrong. And deep down, everyone sensed it. The patrol officer remained standing between Robert and Maya. Not physically intervening. Not taking sides. Just present. Trying to keep the situation from getting worse. Unfortunately, Robert seemed determined to do the opposite. The police chief glanced around. The crowd was still there. The phones were still recording. The attention was still focused on him. That should have felt satisfying. Normally it would have. Today it didn't. Because attention wasn't the same thing as support. And support was disappearing. Slowly. Publicly. One person at a time. Across the sidewalk, the gray-haired veteran continued watching Maya. The longer he observed her, the more certain he became. He'd seen that posture before. Not the clothes. Not the face. The posture. The awareness. The discipline. A memory surfaced. Years ago. A military briefing room. A federal task force. Men and women sitting quietly while others talked. Watching. Listening. Processing. The same energy. The same calm. The old veteran felt a chill. Interesting. Very interesting. Meanwhile, Robert pointed toward Maya again. The gesture had become a habit. Almost an obsession. You still haven't explained yourself. Maya looked at him. Her expression unchanged. What would you like me to explain? The answer immediately frustrated him. Because it wasn't defensive. It wasn't emotional. It was reasonable. Painfully reasonable. The crowd noticed. Again, a woman standing near the curb shook her head. Quietly. Disapprovingly. The reaction didn't escape Robert. Nothing escaped him anymore. That was part of the problem. The more support Maya received, the more determined he became to regain control. The police chief folded his arms. Then unfolded them. Then folded them again. Small signs. Tiny signs. The kind people display when emotions begin outrunning judgment. Maya noticed. Of course she did. She noticed everything. The veteran noticed too. And suddenly another piece clicked into place. Not because of Robert. Because of Maya. Most people watched the person speaking. Maya watched everyone. The crowd. The traffic. The officer. The manager. The cameras. Even reflections in nearby windows. Not constantly. Subtly. Naturally. Automatically. Like breathing. The realization made the old veteran's eyes widen slightly. Now he knew. Or at least he thought he knew. Training. Not military. Not exactly. Something adjacent. Something professional. Something serious. The patrol officer finally cleared his throat. Chief, maybe it's time to let this go. Several heads nodded immediately. The reaction felt almost unanimous. Robert's jaw tightened. Again. There it was. Another challenge. Another person refusing to validate his anger. The police chief looked toward the younger officer. You weren't here. The officer nodded. No, sir. You don't know what happened. Another nod. That's true. The crowd waited. Then the officer added. But I know what I'm looking at now. The sidewalk went quiet. Very quiet. Robert stared. The younger officer immediately realized he had crossed a line. Not a professional one. A personal one. He'd contradicted the chief. In public. The crowd noticed too. And judging by several expressions, they agreed with him. Robert looked away first. Toward the street. Toward the traffic. Toward anything except the reality unfolding around him. Because reality was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. The police chief had entered this encounter expecting authority. Instead, he was losing credibility. The difference mattered. A lot. Meanwhile, Maya remained exactly where she had been from the beginning. Holding her tote bag. Standing beneath the afternoon sun. Looking remarkably calm. Almost detached. Not detached from people. Detached from ego. Detached from conflict. Detached from the need to win. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. One person desperately trying to control the moment. The other completely comfortable letting the moment unfold. The veteran finally stepped forward. Not close enough to interfere. Close enough to speak. Excuse me. Several people turned. Robert turned. Maya turned. The older man adjusted his jacket, then looked directly at Maya. You work federal? The question landed differently. Immediately, the crowd became interested. The patrol officer became interested. Even Robert became interested. For the first time in several minutes, Maya paused before answering. Not because she was nervous, because she was choosing her words. A small but important difference. Finally, she nodded. Yes. The veteran's expression changed. Only slightly, but enough. Enough for Maya to notice. Enough for Robert to notice. Enough for the audience to notice. The old man smiled faintly. Not a friendly smile. Not an unfriendly one. A knowing smile. The kind people wear when they finally solve part of a puzzle. I thought so. Robert immediately looked at him. What does that mean? The veteran shrugged. Nothing. The answer irritated him. What do you mean, nothing? The old man looked toward Maya, then back at Robert. I mean, she's not acting like someone who's worried. The statement hung in the air. Heavy. Uncomfortable. True. Nobody argued. Because nobody could. The crowd had been watching for nearly half an hour. Not once had Maya appeared rattled. Not once had she raised her voice. Not once had she looked intimidated. The veteran continued. Most people get nervous when a police chief starts yelling at them. Silence. Then, she didn't. The observation felt simple, yet somehow devastating. Because it exposed the entire situation. The imbalance. The escalation. The ego. The truth. Robert looked toward Maya. Really looked this time. For perhaps the first time since the confrontation began. Not as an obstacle. Not as an annoyance. Not as a problem. As a person. A person who remained remarkably calm despite everything. And suddenly, for a brief moment, uncertainty entered his mind. Who exactly was she? The thought appeared, then disappeared. His pride pushed it away almost immediately. A mistake. A very expensive mistake. Because while Robert was still trying to figure out who Maya was, someone across the street lowered his phone after watching the live stream. Then picked up another phone. This one for a call. A serious call. A call that would change everything. The man waited for the line to connect, then quietly said, You might want to see this. Back on the sidewalk, Maya felt her phone vibrate once inside her bag. A single notification. Nothing unusual. Yet something about the timing caught her attention. Not concern. Recognition. As if a process already in motion had just reached its next stage. She didn't check the phone. Didn't need to. Instead, she looked at Robert. Calm. Patient. Almost sympathetic. And for the first time all afternoon, a small crack appeared in Robert Harlan's certainty. The problem was simple. He still didn't understand why. The crack in Robert Harlan's confidence lasted less than a second. Then his ego sealed it. Just as quickly. Who exactly was she? The question had entered his mind. But instead of exploring it, he dismissed it. A mistake. A very dangerous mistake. The crowd remained gathered around the sidewalk. Traffic continued flowing through downtown. The afternoon sun had begun its slow descent behind the buildings. Long shadows stretched across the pavement. Still nobody left. Because everyone could feel it. The confrontation was changing. Slowly, but unmistakably. The argument wasn't getting smaller. It was getting bigger. Robert looked toward the patrol officer. Then toward Maya. Then toward the crowd. The phones. The cameras. The whispers. Something inside him refused to accept what was happening. Authority wasn't supposed to work this way. People weren't supposed to question him. Especially in public. Especially not strangers. The police chief folded his arms. Then unfolded them. Again. A sign. A small sign. The kind people display when they are losing control of a situation but refuse to admit it. Maya noticed. Of course she noticed. She noticed everything. The veteran noticed too. And for some reason, that made him uneasy. The older man had seen leaders before. Good ones. Bad ones. The difference usually appeared when things stopped going according to plan. Good leaders adapted. Bad leaders escalated. Robert appeared to be choosing the second option. The police chief looked at the younger officer. What's your name? The question surprised him. Officer Lewis, sir. Robert nodded. Then pointed toward Maya. I want her identified. The crowd immediately went silent. Not quieter. Silent. The words landed differently. Officer Lewis blinked. Sir. Robert's voice hardened. You heard me. The younger officer hesitated. The hesitation itself felt important. Because everyone knew what was happening. The conversation had crossed a line. A subtle line. But a line nonetheless. Lewis glanced toward Maya. Then back toward Robert. On what basis? The question hung in the air. Heavy. Dangerous. Several people stopped recording and simply stared. The restaurant manager looked uncomfortable. The veteran frowned. Even the valet attendants exchanged nervous looks. Robert's jaw tightened. She caused a disturbance. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody agreed. The silence answered for them. Officer Lewis looked around. At the crowd. At the phones. At the witnesses. Then back toward Robert. Respectfully. Carefully. He chose his next words with obvious caution. Sir, from what I've seen. He paused. Everyone waited. I don't believe that's accurate. The sidewalk froze. A woman near the front actually covered her mouth. Not because the statement was dramatic. Because it was brave. The younger officer had just contradicted the police chief. Publicly. Robert stared at him. Disbelief flashed across his face. Not anger yet. Disbelief. The kind people experience when reality refuses to cooperate. You don't believe? Lewis remained calm. As of right now, I don't see probable cause for detention. The phrase changed everything. Probable cause. A legal standard. Not an opinion. Not a feeling. A standard. Several people immediately nodded. The veteran nodded too. Maya remained silent. Watching. Listening. The same calm expression. The same steady breathing. The same patience. Robert looked at her. Then at Lewis. Then back at her. And suddenly the entire situation became personal. Not because of the coffee. Not because of the crowd. Because she had become the symbol of something he couldn't control. The police chief took a step forward. You know what your problem is? Nobody answered. Robert pointed toward Maya. Again. The gesture had become almost automatic. You think you're above accountability. A few people frowned. The statement sounded familiar. He had already said something similar earlier. Repeating himself now. A sign of frustration. A sign of weakening arguments. Maya looked directly at him. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then, I've been standing here answering your questions for half an hour. Silence. The sentence landed hard. Because it was true. Painfully true. Nobody could dispute it. Not the crowd. Not the officer. Not even Robert. The police chief felt the audience slipping further away. The realization made something inside him snap. Not completely. Just enough. Enough to cross the line. Robert turned toward Officer Lewis. His voice lower now. Colder. I gave you an instruction. The crowd immediately felt the shift. Authority. Pressure. Hierarchy. The dynamic had changed. Lewis noticed too. The younger officer looked uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Because now he wasn't being asked. He was being ordered. Several people in the crowd exchanged worried looks. A woman stopped live streaming long enough to whisper. That's not right. The veteran nodded. No, it wasn't. Maya finally spoke. The first time in several minutes. Officer. Lewis looked at her. Her voice remained calm. Professional. Measured. If he wants my identification, I can provide it. The statement surprised everyone. Including Robert. Including Lewis. Because there was no fear in it. No resistance. No concern. Almost as if she welcomed the request. Almost as if she knew something nobody else did. Robert noticed. And for a brief moment, uncertainty returned. Again. Who exactly was she? The question surfaced. Again. Then his pride buried it. Again. The police chief folded his arms. Certain he had regained control. Certain the moment was finally turning. Officer Lewis looked hesitant. The veteran looked concerned. The crowd looked confused. Only Maya appeared completely at ease. The vibration inside her tote bag came again. Brief. Single. Controlled. Another notification. Another message. This time she glanced downward. Just for a moment. Then back up. Nothing changed. Yet somehow the veteran felt the atmosphere shift. The way sailors feel weather changing before the clouds arrive. The way experienced officers recognize danger before it appears. Something was coming. He could feel it. Across the street, more people had stopped walking. More phones had appeared. The crowd was larger now than it had been 10 minutes ago. And somewhere beyond the sidewalk, beyond the traffic, beyond the growing audience, someone else was already paying attention. Someone who recognized Maya Brooks. Someone who understood exactly why she wasn't worried. Robert Harlan didn't. Not yet. But he was about to. Nobody understood why Maya Brooks looked so calm. Not Officer Lewis. Not the veteran. Not the crowd. And certainly not Robert Harlan. Yet the answer was standing right in front of them. The problem was simple. Nobody knew where to look. The late afternoon sun reflected off nearby office windows. Traffic rolled through the intersection. People continued stopping, watching, recording. The crowd had become far larger than anyone realized. Dozens now, maybe more. The confrontation had turned into a spectacle, and spectacles had a way of attracting attention, especially online. Robert folded his arms, trying to project confidence, trying to project authority, trying to convince himself he still controlled the situation. The problem was that control and confidence weren't the same thing. And somewhere deep down, he was beginning to feel the difference. Officer Lewis looked uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. The younger officer shifted his weight, then looked at Maya, then at Robert, then back again. Nobody seemed happy about what was happening, except Robert, or at least he was pretending to be. The police chief nodded toward Maya. Go ahead. The crowd waited. Several phones zoomed in. The veteran narrowed his eyes. Even the restaurant manager leaned slightly forward. Maya nodded politely. Of course. Again, no argument, no resistance, no fear. The same calm voice, the same measured tone, the same composure that had puzzled everyone for nearly half an hour. She placed her tote bag carefully on a nearby bench. Not rushed, not dramatic. Carefully. Then she opened it. The crowd leaned in. People expected something ordinary. A driver's license, a government ID, a business card, maybe a work badge. Something simple, something boring. Robert certainly did. The police chief stood with his chin slightly raised. Certain he had finally reached the end of the conversation. Certain the mystery was about to disappear. The veteran wasn't so sure. His instincts kept bothering him. The same instincts that had kept him alive decades earlier. The same instincts that warned him when something didn't fit. And nothing about Maya fit. Nothing. She reached inside the bag. Several people stopped breathing. Not literally, but close. The tension had become that obvious. That's strange. Officer Lewis watched carefully. Professional habit. The crowd watched. Human curiosity. Robert watched. Ego. 3 very different reasons. One very important moment. Maya withdrew a leather credential holder. Small. Black. Professional. The veteran immediately felt his stomach tighten. Interesting. Very interesting. Robert didn't notice. Not yet. The police chief extended his hand impatiently. Let's see it. Maya looked at him, then at Officer Lewis. The choice seemed deliberate. Very deliberate. Finally, she handed the credential holder to Lewis. Not Robert. Lewis accepted it automatically, then opened it. The world seemed to stop. Just for a second. 1 second. 2. 3. The young officer blinked, looked down again, then looked up, then down again. His entire posture changed. Immediately, the crowd noticed. The veteran noticed. Maya noticed. Most importantly, Robert noticed. The police chief frowned. What is it? Lewis didn't answer. At first, he simply stared, as if his brain needed an extra moment to catch up. Robert took a step closer. What is it? The officer finally looked up. His voice sounded different now. Respectful, but not the same kind of respect. A different kind. The kind professionals give other professionals. The kind people earn. Sir. Lewis paused. The crowd waited. The city seemed to hold its breath. Then he finished. She's federal. Silence. Complete silence. The words hit the sidewalk like a dropped weight. Federal. Several people exchanged confused looks. The restaurant manager frowned. A teenager lowered his phone. The veteran closed his eyes briefly. There it is. The missing piece. Robert laughed. A short laugh. Dismissive. Relieved. Almost eager. Federal. He shook his head. That's what this is about. The police chief looked around, trying to recover momentum, trying to recover status, trying to recover control. Lots of people work for the federal government. Nobody answered, because nobody was watching him anymore. They were watching Lewis. And Lewis looked stunned. The difference mattered. A lot. Robert finally noticed. His smile weakened. Only slightly. Then he looked at Maya. The black woman remained exactly as she had been all afternoon. Calm. Patient. Almost sympathetic. The expression suddenly felt different. Much different. The veteran spoke for the first time in several minutes. Quietly. Almost to himself. Oh boy. Several people turned toward him. The old man shook his head slowly. A smile appeared. Not because he found the situation funny. Because he finally understood it. Robert didn't. Not yet. The police chief looked at Lewis. Then held out his hand. Give it to me. The officer hesitated. That hesitation changed everything. Again. Because people hesitate when they know something matters. Lewis handed over the credential holder. Slowly, Robert opened it. Confident. Almost bored. Then he saw the seal. His eyes stopped moving. The color drained from his face. Not completely. Just enough. Enough for the crowd to notice. Enough for Maya to notice. Enough for the veteran to notice. Robert looked down again. Reading. Rereading. Making sure he hadn't misunderstood. Then he looked up. For the first time all afternoon, the police chief appeared uncertain. Real uncertainty. Not frustration. Not anger. Uncertainty. The crowd waited. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Even the traffic noise seemed distant. Finally, Officer Lewis broke the silence. His voice low. Professional. Careful. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The words echoed through the crowd. FBI. A woman near the back gasped. Someone lowered their phone. Someone else raised theirs higher. The veteran laughed softly. Not surprised. Relieved. Because now everything made sense. The composure. The awareness. The confidence. The calm. Every piece fit. Across the sidewalk, Robert Harlan stared at Maya Brooks. The woman he had spent nearly an hour trying to intimidate. The woman he had ordered identified. The woman he had treated like she was powerless. And for the first time that day, he realized he might be the one standing on the wrong side of the conversation. The problem was simple. He still had no idea how wrong. The word FBI seemed to linger in the air. Long after Officer Lewis said it. Long after the crowd reacted. Long after the silence settled over the sidewalk. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For nearly a full minute. The confrontation had changed. Completely. An hour earlier, Robert Harlan had been the most powerful person in the conversation. Now nobody seemed quite sure. Including Robert. The police chief continued staring at the credential holder. His eyes moving between the seal and the photograph. Then back again. As if repeating the process might somehow change the outcome. It didn't. The badge remained real. The identification remained real. And the growing crowd remained very interested. Across the sidewalk, phones continued recording. Only now people weren't filming an angry police chief confronting a stranger. They were filming an angry police chief confronting an FBI agent. The difference mattered. A lot. Officer Lewis stood noticeably straighter. Not because he was intimidated. Because protocol mattered. Professional courtesy mattered. And suddenly this situation involved federal law enforcement. The younger officer looked toward Maya. A different look now. Respect. The kind earned through responsibility. Not demanded through rank. Robert noticed. That bothered him. More than he wanted to admit. The police chief finally closed the credential holder. Slowly. Carefully. Then handed it back. Maya accepted it. Placed it inside her tote bag. The same calm movements. The same measured pace. Nothing about her behavior had changed. Because from her perspective, nothing had. The crowd, however, was changing rapidly. People whispered. Questions spread. The restaurant manager suddenly looked much less confident. The valet attendants exchanged nervous glances. Even the woman live streaming had stopped speaking. She simply held the phone up. Watching. Waiting. Sensing more was coming. The veteran certainly thought so. Years of experience had taught him something. Important revelations rarely arrived alone. They usually traveled in groups. Robert cleared his throat. Trying to recover. Trying to regain balance. Trying to regain authority. So you're FBI? Maya nodded. Yes. Again. Short answers. No drama. No performance. No attempt to embarrass him. Strangely enough, that made things worse. Because public humiliation is easier to fight than quiet dignity. Robert shifted his weight. The crowd noticed. His confidence was beginning to look different. Less certainty. More calculation. The police chief folded his arms. Then unfolded them. Again. A habit now. A tell. A visible sign that the ground beneath him no longer felt stable. What division? The question surprised several people. Maya looked at him. For a moment, she seemed to consider not answering. Then, public corruption. The sidewalk froze. Again, Officer Lewis blinked. The veteran slowly exhaled. The restaurant manager looked away. And Robert stopped moving entirely. The words landed differently. Much differently. Public corruption. Not narcotics. Not cybercrime. Not terrorism. Public corruption. The phrase carried weight. Heavy weight. Because it meant investigations involving public officials. Government employees. Abuse of authority. Misconduct. The exact kind of behavior everyone had just watched unfold for nearly an hour. Several people in the crowd immediately exchanged looks. One man quietly muttered, "No way." Another simply shook his head. The livestream comments were exploding now. Though nobody present could see them, thousands of strangers were watching, reacting, connecting the dots. Robert felt a knot forming in his stomach. Small at first, then larger, because suddenly a question entered his mind. A dangerous question. Had she been investigating him? The possibility appeared instantly, and refused to leave. The police chief looked directly at Maya. For the first time all afternoon, his voice lacked aggression. "What exactly are you doing here?" The change didn't escape anyone. The crowd noticed. Officer Lewis noticed. The veteran definitely noticed. Even Maya noticed. The man who had spent the last hour demanding answers was now asking for them. Politely. The shift was impossible to miss. Maya studied him for a moment, then answered, "I was meeting someone for lunch." The response surprised everyone, including Robert. Especially Robert, because it sounded ordinary. Too ordinary. The police chief frowned. That's it. That's it. The answer was immediate, honest, simple, and somehow that made the situation even worse. Because if Maya was telling the truth, then Robert had created this entire disaster himself. No investigation, no operation, no setup, no trap, just coffee, ego, and bad decisions. The realization hit harder than he expected. The veteran smiled faintly. He could see it happening. The slow collapse of certainty. The slow arrival of self-awareness. Painful, uncomfortable, necessary. Then Maya's phone rang. Not vibrated. Rang. The sound instantly drew attention. Maya glanced at the screen. For the first time all afternoon, something changed in her expression. Not fear. Not concern. Recognition. Professional recognition. The kind people show when an expected call finally arrives. She answered. "Brooks." The conversation lasted less than 20 seconds. Mostly listening. Very little speaking. Then, understood. A pause. Another. "I'm still at the location." Pause. "Yes." Then she ended the call. The crowd watched carefully. Nobody tried pretending otherwise. Robert swallowed. The knot in his stomach tightened. Because suddenly he wasn't worried about who Maya was. He was worried about who had just called her. Officer Lewis seemed to be thinking the same thing. The younger officer shifted his stance. Instinctively. Almost unconsciously. Preparing. For what? He wasn't sure. But something. Definitely something. Maya slipped her phone back into her bag. Then looked toward the intersection. A black SUV had just turned the corner. The same type she'd noticed earlier. Only this one wasn't passing through. It slowed. Then stopped. Directly across the street. The crowd noticed immediately. So did Robert. Two men stepped out. Dark suits. Professional posture. Purposeful movements. Nobody needed an introduction. Nobody needed an explanation. The veteran laughed softly. "Oh, this just got worse." Robert felt his stomach drop. Because those men weren't looking at Maya like co-workers greeting a friend. They were looking at her like someone reporting to a lead investigator. One of them crossed the street. The crowd automatically stepped aside, creating a path. The man stopped beside Maya, then quietly asked, "Everything okay, Special Agent Brooks?" Special Agent. The title echoed through Robert's mind. Not employee, not analyst, not support staff. Special Agent. The realization landed heavily. Very heavily. And as the two agents exchanged a brief professional glance, another realization followed right behind it. A much worse one. Maya Brooks hadn't revealed her identity to protect herself. She never needed protection. The entire time, she had been protecting him from making an even bigger mistake. For the first time that afternoon, Robert Harlan wished the crowd would leave. An hour earlier, he had wanted attention. Now attention felt dangerous. Very dangerous. The two FBI agents stood beside Maya. Calm. Professional. Unimpressed by the growing audience. One of them exchanged a few quiet words with her. Nothing dramatic. Nothing confrontational. Yet somehow their presence changed everything. The sidewalk no longer felt like a public argument. It felt like a scene. A documented scene. A recorded scene. A scene that wasn't going away. Robert looked around. The phones were still there. Maybe more than before. The live streams were still running. The whispers were getting louder. And suddenly he understood something uncomfortable. Every minute of the last hour existed on video. Every word. Every threat. Every order. Every mistake. The realization settled heavily inside him. Across the crowd, the veteran noticed. The old man had seen that expression before. The moment confidence turns into calculation. The moment a person stops asking, "How do I win this?" and starts asking, "How bad is this?" The difference was important. Robert was finally asking the second question. Unfortunately, he was asking it too late. Officer Lewis remained nearby. The younger officer looked relieved. Not because Maya was FBI, because the situation finally made sense. The calmness, the confidence, the complete lack of concern. Now there was context. Now there was an explanation. The officer glanced toward Robert, then quickly looked away. Respect still existed, but it wasn't the same anymore. Something had changed. The police chief felt it, painfully. Meanwhile, Maya hadn't moved. She wasn't giving interviews, wasn't making speeches, wasn't enjoying the moment. She simply stood there, listening as one of the agents quietly updated her. The professionalism frustrated Robert. Strangely enough, it would have been easier if she had mocked him, easier if she had celebrated, easier if she had tried to embarrass him. She didn't, and that somehow made everything worse. Because the contrast had become impossible to ignore. One person spent an hour escalating. The other spent an hour de-escalating. The crowd had seen both. The cameras had captured both. Reality wasn't complicated anymore. Then Robert's phone rang. The sound startled him. Not because it was loud, because he wasn't expecting it. The caller ID made his stomach tighten immediately. Deputy Chief Morrison. Robert hesitated, then answered. "Yeah." The voice on the other end sounded tense. Very tense. "Where are you?" The question felt strange. Robert looked around. Downtown. The crowd. The cameras. The FBI agents. The answer suddenly seemed obvious. "Why?" A pause. Then, "Your face is everywhere." Silence. The words landed harder than anything Maya had said all day. Because Maya hadn't threatened him. The internet had. The live streams had. The witnesses had. The videos had. Robert slowly turned away from the crowd. Instinctively. As if that could somehow undo the last hour. It couldn't. Morrison continued. City Hall called. Another pause. Then Internal Affairs. Another. And now reporters are calling the department. The knot in Robert's stomach tightened. Fast. Very fast. The crowd couldn't hear the conversation, but they could see his expression changing. The veteran noticed. Officer Lewis noticed. Even Maya glanced over briefly. The police chief suddenly looked older. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone realizing consequences have already begun. The call ended less than a minute later. Robert lowered the phone slowly. For several seconds, he simply stared at the screen. The afternoon suddenly felt much quieter. Though the crowd hadn't changed. The traffic hadn't changed. Nothing around him had changed. Only his perspective. Then another realization arrived. A worse one. The FBI wasn't the problem. Maya wasn't the problem. The real problem was what everyone had already seen. The public shaming. The abuse of authority. The attempt to use a patrol officer to pressure a citizen. The demand for identification without cause. The intimidation. The arrogance. The entire thing. Recorded. Shared. Permanent. The police chief looked toward Maya. She was speaking quietly with the other agents. Professional. Focused. Already moving forward. The confrontation seemed finished in her mind. Robert wished it was finished in his. It wasn't. Not even close. The veteran slowly approached. Not aggressively. Not judgmentally. Just quietly. The older man stopped a few feet away. Then spoke. "You know the worst part?" Robert looked up. Tired now. Defensive. The veteran nodded toward the crowd. "You think people are upset because she's FBI?" Silence. The old man shook his head. "That's not it." Robert said nothing. The veteran continued. "They're upset because they watched how you treated her before you knew." The words landed hard. Harder than any accusation. Because they were true. Painfully true. The old man wasn't finished. If she'd been an ordinary woman. He paused, letting the thought settle. Would anything have been different? Neither man answered. They didn't need to. The crowd already knew. Robert knew. And for the first time all afternoon, he hated the answer. Across the street, a news van turned the corner. Then another. Someone pointed. Someone else whispered. The crowd immediately noticed. Reporters. Real reporters. The situation was growing. Fast. Much faster than Robert had anticipated. One of the FBI agents looked toward the arriving media. Then toward Maya. "You want us to handle this?" Maya followed his gaze. The reporters. The cameras. The attention. Then she shook her head. No. Simple. Immediate. Certain. The agent nodded. No questions asked. Robert watched the exchange. Confused. Why wasn't she taking advantage of this? Why wasn't she making it worse? The answer arrived a moment later. Maya looked at him. Not with anger. Not with victory. Not with satisfaction. Something else. Disappointment. The expression hit harder than any public humiliation ever could. Because disappointment implied expectation. As though she had expected better from him. As though she believed he should have known better. Perhaps he should have. A reporter began crossing the street. Microphone in hand. Camera crew following close behind. Then another reporter. And another. The crowd parted automatically. Making room. Creating a path. The story had escaped the sidewalk. Now it belonged to the city. Robert watched them approaching. Then looked back toward Maya. And for the first time all afternoon, a thought entered his mind that he couldn't ignore. The worst thing that happened today wasn't discovering she was FBI. The worst thing was discovering who he had become when he thought she wasn't. The reporters arrived faster than Robert expected. Much faster. Within minutes, the sidewalk looked completely different. Camera crews. Microphones. News vans. Producers speaking into headsets. People pushing through the crowd. The confrontation had become a story. A real story. And real stories had consequences. Robert stood frozen for a moment, watching it happen. The strange part was that nobody seemed interested in the spilled coffee anymore. Nobody cared about the suit. Nobody cared about the accident. Those details had vanished. The story had evolved. Now it was about something else. Power. Authority. Behavior. Character. And Robert was beginning to understand which side of that story he occupied. The realization wasn't pleasant. A reporter approached first. Young. Professional. Determined. She stopped several feet away. Chief Harlan, do you have a statement? Robert opened his mouth, then stopped. Because for the first time all afternoon, he genuinely didn't know what to say. The silence stretched. The camera remained focused. The crowd watched. The reporter waited. Every second felt longer than the one before. Finally, Robert answered. No. The single word sounded weak. Even to him. The reporter nodded. Professional. Unemotional. Then asked another question. Is it true you attempted to order a detention without probable cause? The sidewalk became quiet again. Not because people hadn't heard the question. Because they had. Every single person there had. Including Officer Lewis. The young patrol officer immediately looked uncomfortable. Robert felt heat rising into his face. The same heat. The same embarrassment. Only now there was nowhere to direct it. No stranger to blame. No argument to hide behind. Just reality. The reporter waited. Again. No comment. The answer came faster this time. The woman nodded. Wrote something down. Moved on. The efficiency somehow made everything worse. Because she wasn't attacking him. She was documenting him. Across the crowd, Maya watched quietly. Still calm. Still composed. Still refusing to become part of the spectacle. One of the FBI agents leaned toward her. Want us to leave? Maya looked toward Robert. Then toward the reporters. Then back again. Not yet. The agent nodded. No further explanation needed. Meanwhile, another call reached Robert's phone. Then another. Then another. He ignored all of them. City Hall. Department command staff. Local media. Friends. Colleagues. The screen kept lighting up. The notifications kept appearing. Like raindrops before a storm. The veteran watched from a distance. Something about Robert looked different now. Not defeated. Not yet. Just exhausted. The kind of exhaustion that appears when a person spends an entire day fighting reality. Eventually, reality wins. It always does. Officer Lewis approached cautiously. The younger officer stopped beside him. Neither man spoke immediately. Several seconds passed. Then Lewis quietly said, Sir. Robert looked up. The title sounded different now. Not less respectful. Just sadder. The police chief nodded. What? Lewis hesitated. Choosing his words carefully. Very carefully. There are supervisors on the way. Robert already knew. Of course they were. The department couldn't ignore this anymore. Nobody could. The police chief looked toward the growing line of reporters. Then toward Maya. Then toward the crowd. Every face seemed familiar now. Not because he knew them. Because they had all witnessed the same thing. And witnesses are difficult to argue with. A black SUV arrived at the curb. Different from the FBI vehicle. Different from the news crews. Department vehicle. The crowd noticed immediately. Several reporters turned. Cameras shifted. Attention moved. A senior officer stepped out. Deputy Chief Morrison. His expression told the story before he spoke a single word. Concern. Frustration. Disappointment. All at once. Morrison walked directly toward Robert, ignoring reporters, ignoring cameras, ignoring everyone else. The two men stood face to face. For several moments, neither spoke. Then Morrison sighed. A long sigh, the kind that comes from dealing with a preventable problem. You need to come with me. Simple, direct, professional. Robert nodded. No argument. No resistance. For perhaps the first time all day, the crowd watched. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. An hour earlier, Robert had been trying to control another person's movement. Now someone else was directing his. Life had a strange sense of balance sometimes. The reporters immediately surged forward. Questions flew from every direction. Chief Harlan, are you being investigated? Will you be placed on leave? What happened here today? The questions came rapidly, relentlessly. Robert didn't answer, couldn't answer, because every answer felt wrong. Every explanation sounded smaller than the facts. Morrison guided him toward the vehicle. Not physically, professionally. The difference mattered. Maya noticed. The veteran noticed. Even Officer Lewis noticed. Respect still existed. Despite everything, that fact somehow made the moment sadder. Before reaching the SUV, Robert stopped. Unexpectedly, the movement surprised Morrison. It surprised the reporters. It surprised the crowd. Then Robert turned. Not toward the cameras. Not toward City Hall. Not toward the reporters. Toward Maya. The sidewalk seemed to pause. Waiting. The police chief stared at her. The woman he had spent the last hour trying to dominate. The woman who never raised her voice. The woman who never insulted him. The woman who never used her badge as a weapon. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Robert finally asked the question he should have asked at the very beginning. Why didn't you tell me? The crowd fell silent. Maya looked at him. Not angry, not triumphant, just thoughtful. Then she answered, because unlike Robert earlier, she didn't need an audience. Her voice remained calm, steady, certain, because it shouldn't have mattered. Silence. Absolute silence. The words landed harder than every headline, harder than every camera, harder than every consequence waiting ahead, because everyone understood what she meant. If respect depends on a badge, it isn't respect. If dignity depends on status, it isn't dignity. And if kindness only appears after discovering someone's important, it was never kindness at all. Robert lowered his eyes. Just briefly, but long enough. Long enough for everyone to see. Long enough for him to see. The reporters didn't ask questions. The crowd didn't speak. Nobody interrupted. Because for the first time all afternoon, there was nothing left to argue about. Only something left to understand. And standing beneath the fading evening sunlight, Robert Harlan finally realized that losing his position might not be the hardest part. The hardest part would be facing the man he'd become before he knew who she was. 3 weeks later, the story was still alive. Not on every news channel, not in every headline, but alive. The internet never forgot completely, especially when cameras captured something people recognized. And people had recognized something in Robert Harlan. Not a scandal, not corruption, something more familiar. Arrogance. The kind everyone had encountered at some point in life. A boss, a teacher, a manager, a public official, someone who believed position mattered more than people. That was why the video spread. Not because Maya was FBI, because the behavior felt familiar. And familiarity travels fast. Robert understood that now, better than anyone. The former police chief sat alone inside a conference room. Quiet, almost empty. A cardboard box rested beside his chair. Department paperwork. Personal photographs, awards, certificates, fragments of a career. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old carpet. Outside the glass wall, officers continued moving through the building, working, talking, living their lives. The department kept functioning, with or without him. That realization had been difficult at first. Now it simply felt true. Robert stared at a framed photograph. Graduation day, Police Academy, 27 years earlier. The young man in the picture looked different. Not physically, hopeful, idealistic, certain he would make a difference, certain he would serve people. Somewhere along the way, that version of himself had disappeared. The question that haunted him wasn't when. The question was why. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Robert looked up. Deputy Chief Morrison stood in the doorway. You ready? Robert nodded slowly. I think so. Morrison didn't look convinced. Truthfully, neither was Robert. The meeting had been his idea. Not the department's. Not the city's. His. After 3 weeks of interviews, reviews, investigations, and headlines, he wanted one conversation. One honest conversation. Morrison opened the door wider. She's here. The words landed heavily. Not because Robert was afraid. Because he wasn't sure what he deserved. A few minutes later, Maya Brooks entered the room. Exactly as composed as she had been on the sidewalk. The same calm presence. The same quiet confidence. The same professional demeanor. She carried a folder beneath one arm. Nothing else. Robert stood immediately. A reflex. Respect. Something he should have shown from the beginning. Maya nodded politely. Chief Harlan. Robert managed a faint smile. Not anymore. For the first time, Maya smiled slightly. A real smile. Small. Brief. Gone almost immediately. Yet somehow it changed the atmosphere. The room felt less formal. Less defensive. More human. Morrison quietly closed the door behind them, leaving the two alone. Silence settled across the room. Not uncomfortable silence. Thoughtful silence. The kind that appears when words actually matter. Robert looked at the table, then at Maya, then back again. For a moment, he seemed unsure where to begin. Finally he spoke. I watched the video. Maya said nothing. He continued. Several times. A humorless laugh escaped him. That was painful. The honesty surprised even him. Maya pulled out a chair. Sat down. Waited. Not rescuing him from the moment. Not making it harder. Simply allowing it to exist. Robert slowly sat as well. The conference room suddenly felt smaller. Not because of Maya. Because truth has a way of reducing available space. The former chief rubbed his hands together. Then stopped. A nervous habit. One he never used to have. I kept hoping I'd find context. Silence. Something that explained it. Another pause. Something that made me look better. Maya listened quietly. Robert looked away. Toward the window. Toward the officers walking outside. Toward anything except his own reflection in the glass. There wasn't any. The admission hung in the room. Heavy. Real. Necessary. Several seconds passed. Then Maya finally spoke. No. Her voice remained gentle. Not cruel. Not judgmental. Just honest. The simplicity somehow made it easier. And harder. At the same time. Robert nodded. Slowly. Accepting it. For perhaps the first time. Then he asked the question that had followed him for weeks. Are you investigating me? Maya looked at him. Directly. No. The answer arrived immediately. Without hesitation. Without calculation. No. Robert blinked. Surprised. Despite everything, part of him had still believed the answer might be yes. Maya folded her hands. The review is being handled by your department and the city. Robert stared, trying to process it. But the public corruption unit. Maya shook her head. Was never there for you. Silence. The words echoed inside his mind. Never there for you. The realization felt strange. 3 weeks. 3 weeks assuming he had become the target. 3 weeks imagining investigations and files and accusations. And all along, he wasn't the story. His behavior was. The difference mattered. A lot. Maya studied him for a moment. Then asked a question of her own. A simple question. The kind that slips past defenses. Do you know what bothered people most? Robert almost laughed. The video? She shook her head. No. He frowned. The badge. Again. No. The former chief looked genuinely confused. Maya leaned back slightly. The moment Officer Lewis hesitated. Robert said nothing. She continued. People saw 2 versions of authority. The room became very quiet. One based on rank. A pause. And one based on responsibility. The words landed carefully. Not as criticism. As observation. The distinction hit harder than any accusation. Because deep down, Robert understood exactly what she meant. The silence stretched. Neither person rushed to fill it. Finally, Robert looked at her. His eyes tired. Honest. Different from the man on the sidewalk. I owe you an apology. Maya held his gaze. The former chief exhaled slowly. Not for the coffee. Not for the headlines. Not for the embarrassment. For something deeper. Something more important. I treated you differently because I thought you were powerless. The room went silent. Completely silent. Because both of them knew that was the real truth. Not the suit. Not the argument. Not the badge. That. Maya listened. Robert lowered his eyes. Briefly. Then finished. And I would have kept doing it if I never knew who you were. No excuses. No qualifications. No justifications. Just truth. The kind truth usually costs something. Maya sat quietly for several seconds. Then finally nodded. Not because the damage disappeared. Not because everything was fixed. Because accountability begins with honesty. And honesty had finally arrived. The afternoon sunlight stretched across the conference room table. Warm. Golden. Quiet. For the first time since that day on the sidewalk, Robert felt something unfamiliar. Not relief. Not forgiveness. Something smaller. Something more important. The possibility of becoming better than the man in that video. And for the first time, Maya believed he might. 6 months later, nobody talked about the coffee anymore. The internet had moved on. It always did. New stories. New scandals. New arguments. New distractions. The world rarely stayed focused for long. Yet some stories left marks. Not on headlines. On people. This was one of them. The city looked different that morning. Or perhaps Robert Harlan looked different. The distinction mattered. A lot. The former police chief sat alone on a wooden bench outside a community center. Children's voices echoed from somewhere nearby. Laughter drifted through the open courtyard. A basketball bounced against concrete. Life. Simple life. The kind he used to overlook. Sunlight filtered through the trees. Warm. Quiet. Ordinary. Robert appreciated ordinary now. He never used to. A folded newspaper rested beside him. Not because he wanted to read it. Habit. Old habits survived longer than pride. Inside the community center, a public outreach event was underway. Local residents. Students. Teachers. Community leaders. Police officers. Federal agents. People from different worlds sharing the same room. Years ago, Robert might have viewed that as symbolic. Today, he simply viewed it as necessary. The doors opened. People slowly began leaving. Conversations continued on the sidewalk. Small groups gathered beneath the morning sun. Robert watched quietly. Not hiding. Not seeking attention. Just present. A very different version of himself than the man who once stood on a downtown sidewalk demanding recognition. Several officers exited the building. One of them stopped. Officer Lewis. The same young patrol officer. The same officer who had hesitated. The same officer Maya mentioned during their conversation months earlier. Lewis spotted Robert. Then smiled. A genuine smile. Not awkward. Not forced. "Morning, sir." Robert laughed softly. The title still felt strange. "Morning." Lewis sat briefly on the bench. Neither man seemed uncomfortable. That alone felt remarkable. For a few moments they watched people moving through the courtyard. Then Lewis spoke. "The academy uses that video now." Robert closed his eyes. Of course they did. The former chief groaned. The younger officer laughed. Not cruelly. Almost affectionately. "Not the way you think." Robert looked over. Lewis continued. "They use it in leadership training." The statement surprised him. Genuinely. The younger officer nodded. First half for what not to do. A pause. Then, second half for accountability. Robert stared, trying to process that. The irony almost made him smile. Almost. The young officer stood, adjusting his uniform. Before leaving, he looked back. "You know?" Robert waited. Lewis shrugged. Most people never admit they were wrong. Then he walked away, leaving the words behind. The former chief watched him disappear into the crowd. Thoughtful. Quiet. Because Lewis was right. Many people protected their pride. Very few surrendered it. Especially publicly. Especially after losing. The doors opened again. This time Maya Brooks stepped outside. The morning sunlight caught her dark blazer. She carried a folder beneath one arm. Exactly as she had 6 months earlier. Some things hadn't changed. Many had. Several people stopped to speak with her. Students. Parents. Community members. She greeted every one of them the same way. Patiently. Respectfully. Listening more than talking. Robert watched from a distance. Noticing something. Nobody seemed impressed by her title. Most probably didn't even know it. Yet they respected her anyway. The realization brought him back to the sidewalk. Back to the question that had changed everything. Why didn't you tell me? Because it shouldn't have mattered. 6 months later, he finally understood. Not intellectually. Personally. Maya eventually noticed him sitting alone. Their eyes met across the courtyard. She smiled. Then walked over. The same calm walk. The same steady confidence. When she reached the bench, neither spoke immediately. The silence felt familiar now. Comfortable. The way silence feels when nothing needs proving. Finally, Maya sat beside him. The community center buzzed softly behind them. Children laughing, doors opening, conversations drifting through the air, life continuing. Robert looked toward the basketball court, then quietly asked, "Do people still recognize you?" Maya smiled faintly. "Sometimes." And she shrugged. "Most of them forget." The answer seemed fitting, because Maya had never cared about recognition. That was part of what made her different. Robert nodded slowly, then looked down at his hands. The same hands that once pointed, demanded, controlled. For a long moment he said nothing. Then finally, "I spent years thinking authority was something people gave me." Maya listened. The former chief stared at the sunlight stretching across the pavement. "I was wrong." Silence. Then, "It was something I was supposed to earn." Maya didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. Some truths don't require confirmation, only recognition. The wind moved gently through the trees. Children ran across the courtyard. A little girl nearly tripped, then laughed at herself. The sound made both adults smile. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Maya stood. Another event waited inside. Another meeting. Another responsibility. Before leaving, she looked down at Robert. The former chief looked up. Their eyes met. No anger. No resentment. No unfinished business. Only understanding. The kind that arrives after people stop defending themselves from the truth. "Take care of yourself, Robert." The words were simple, yet they carried something important. Respect. Not for his title. Not for his past. For the person he was still trying to become. Robert nodded. "You too, Maya." She smiled once, then walked back toward the community center. Sunlight followed her. Across the courtyard. Warm. Golden. Quiet. Robert watched until she disappeared through the doors. Then he looked around. At the families. The officers. The teachers. The students. The city. 6 months earlier, he had stood in a crowded street demanding people recognize his authority. Today, nobody was paying attention to him. Strangely enough, he preferred it. Because attention and respect were not the same thing. He understood that now. Finally, a breeze stirred the newspaper beside him. The pages shifted, then settled. Robert leaned back against the bench, closed his eyes briefly, and listened. To the children. To the laughter. To the ordinary sounds of people living their lives. For years, he had believed power was the ability to make people listen. Maya Brooks taught him something better. Real authority begins when you learn how to listen first. The morning sunlight stretched across the courtyard. Bright, warm, peaceful, and for the first time in a very long time, Robert Harlan felt grateful. Not for the lesson, not for the humiliation, not even for the second chance. For the woman who refused to become cruel simply because she had every right to be. Because in the end, that was the difference between them. One person used power to control. The other used it to protect. And that difference changed a life.